You don't belong in this lobby. Douglas Whitman's voice boomed across the marble floors of the Horizon Grand, sharp and final, cutting through the hum of early morning guests like a lightning strike. And for a moment the space froze, the polished brass of the elevators gleaming under the overhead lights, the scent of fresh coffee lingering in the air, and all eyes turned toward the source of the disruption. But then Ariana Mitchell stepped through the glass doors with a quiet confidence. Her black tee and fitted jeans. Unassuming, no entourage, no designer bag, just a calm presence that somehow demanded attention without a word. She paused for a single breath, scanning the lobby with a soft gaze that seemed to measure every curve of the marble, every shadow cast by the grand chandelier, the way the sunlight hit the brass fixtures. And yet her eyes never left Douglas, cool and steady, unshaken by the sudden hostility. Her assistant's voice whispered in her earpiece, "Ready?" And she nodded almost imperceptibly, sliding her card smoothly into her hand without a hint of panic. The lobby murmuring in anticipation, a few guests shifting uncomfortably, sensing the tension, cameras raising discreetly from corners as someone pulled out a phone, the young concierge glancing sideways at her with a flicker of recognition, the tension in the room thickening with every passing second, Douglas's smirk faltering as he gestured toward the front desk, the clerks already bristling, hands tightening around pens and reservation logs, whispers of doubt creeping into their demeanor. Ariana moved forward, each step measured, soundless on the polished floor, and she felt the familiar heat of scrutiny, the weight of expectation, and the shadow of past indignities pressing against her chest like a silent reminder that power can be invisible until revealed. And as she approached the front desk, the clerk leaned slightly, an edge of suspicion in their voice, but she didn't flinch, simply sliding her ID and VIP card across the counter with the same calm authority she had carried through decades of boardrooms, meetings, and negotiations, eyes never leaving Douglas's faltering stance, guests exchanging looks, phones capturing every subtle motion, and the air seemed to shift, as if the room itself recognized the quiet storm standing in front of them, a presence both unassuming and unchallengeable, a single breath pulling in the anticipation, the suspense, the faint hum, of a lobby holding its collective breath, waiting for the inevitable shift, the subtle crack in authority that always precedes revelation, and Ariana's lips curled into the faintest hint of a smile, a signal that the rules of the room were about to be rewritten. Power quietly gathering in her calm gaze, every movement deliberate, a prelude to the unfolding truth of who she really was, leaving Douglas and his staff frozen, guests leaning forward, waiting, the cameras recording, and a sense of inevitability settling over the polished lobby as the story of quiet authority, long denied, began to awaken with a force that could no longer be ignored. Ariana Mitchell waited for a single heartbeat, the lobby around her humming with quiet tension, the sunlight reflecting off the marble floors and bouncing gently across the brass accents, casting thin streaks of warmth over the guests who had now shifted closer, phones raised, capturing every subtle move, their curiosity palpable. Douglas Whitman standing rigid behind the front desk, his expression a mixture of disbelief and irritation, the clerks flinching slightly under the weight of Ariana's composed stare, the air in the lobby thickening with anticipation as the staff began exchanging glances, whispering to each other in low tones that carried the undercurrent of unease, and Ariana allowed herself a slow, deliberate breath, grounding herself in the rhythm of the space, feeling the legacy of every decision and every negotiation she had made building her hospitality empire, recalling moments of being underestimated, dismissed, or doubted, the sting of past judgments sharpening her legitimacy of her reservation and the oversight of the staff's assumptions, while guests leaned in slightly, sensing the subtle shift of momentum. The young concierge who had been observing from the side stepping forward cautiously, her posture straightening as she recognized the authority emanating from Ariana, and the clerks at the front desk exchanging uneasy looks, the reality of the situation sinking in, their earlier confidence starting to crumble, whispers spreading faster than the sunlight across the polished surfaces, a few guests murmuring affirmations, others craning their necks to get a better view. the room collectively holding its breath as Ariana allowed the silence to stretch just long enough for her presence to be felt fully, her calm, measured actions casting a shadow over the attempted assertions of control, and as Douglas's smirk faded into a tight line of uncertainty, the murmurs from the guests turning into a low, collective awareness that the narrative of who belonged in this space had shifted, that the power dynamics had quietly, inexorably, been rewritten, and Ariana's gaze sweeping the room, steady and unflinching, conveyed that the story was just beginning, that what had been under the surface was now ready to emerge fully, leaving every person in the lobby acutely aware that her authority was neither accidental nor performative, but grounded in years of experience, foresight, and unwavering confidence, and that the resolution, the full, in appearance, held authority that exceeded the entire staff combined, and the murmurs from the lobby began to swell, a wave of acknowledgement spreading among the guests as they processed the disparity between perception and reality, the clerks exchanging uneasy glances as they realized their assumptions had been both premature and incorrect, and the polished floors seemed to reflect not only the overhead light, but the mounting tension that had transformed the lobby into a stage where power and truth were being revealed, the space itself almost vibrating with the awareness that the balance of authority had quietly shifted, and Ariana's eyes, steady and unwavering, carried a silent message that no words could replicate. The calm in her demeanor contrasting sharply with the escalating discomfort of Douglas and his team, while guests discreetly raised their phones to record. The soft hum of technology intertwining with the low murmurs, capturing every subtle glance, every precise gesture. The air thick with anticipation as the verification system quietly processed the information, the staff now acutely aware that every prior act of doubt or dismissal had been a miscalculation, and Ariana allowed herself a measured smile, not of triumph, but of inevitability, a signal that the quiet assertion of authority was about to unfold fully, leaving the room suspended in a shared moment of realization. The line between observer and participant blurred as each person recognized that the forthcoming revelation would change not only their perception of the lobby, but of the woman who had entered it. Her presence a testament to control exercised without spectacle, the anticipation building, a pulse moving through the polished surfaces, the soft echo of footsteps and shuffling papers harmonizing with the collective intake of breath, and in that delicate balance of observation and assertion, Ariana Mitchell stood poised, a calm epicenter around which the tension swirled, every eye fixed, every thought anticipating the unfolding proof that quiet authority, once established, demanded acknowledgement, leaving the guests and staff alike to wonder, just for a fleeting moment, how the next seconds would irrevocably shift the power they had assumed was theirs to control. Ariana Mitchell shifted slightly, her presence steady and unwavering, the lobby seemingly holding its breath as the subtle hum of guests' whispers grew, phones discreetly raised, capturing each micro-expression, while Douglas Whitman leaned closer to the front desk, his eyes darting between the clerks and the VIP. Cards sliding back and forth in Ariana's hands, the polished marble reflecting the tension, the brass accents catching the sunlight in sharp glints that highlighted the anxious glances of staff, and the young concierge who had been observing cautiously stepped slightly forward, a flicker of recognition passing across her face, acknowledging the quiet authority that radiated from Ariana, her gaze meeting the owners with a mix of surprise and understanding, while the other clerks exchanged uncertain glances, the weight of their earlier assumptions pressing down, and Ariana allowed herself a slow, deliberate breath, grounding herself in the rhythm of the lobby, recalling moments when she had been dismissed, underestimated, or doubted, and letting that calm translate into presence, a presence that commanded attention without a word, every movement purposeful, every glance measured, while guests leaned forward in their seats, sensing the shift in power, the subtle tension now, buzzing like electricity in the air, the polished floors, the ambient light, the faint hum of air conditioning, all converging to frame the moment with cinematic clarity, and Ariana lifted her hand again, signaling her assistant, a gesture so small it could have been missed, but in the charged silence, it resonated like a declaration, activating the verification protocols that would confirm her identity beyond any doubt, and the murmurs among the guests grew, a collective awareness spreading, a recognition that what they were witnessing was more than a simple misunderstanding, that the space they had assumed was controlled by the staff was quietly being reclaimed by the authority of the person they had underestimated. And as Douglas's smirk faltered into a thin line of uncertainty, the subtle tension of the lobby deepened, guests straightening, leaning in, eyes tracking every subtle movement, the air charged with anticipation, each second stretching, filled with the promise of, and precision, leaving the lobby charged, every eye fixed on Ariana Mitchell, waiting for the moment the full truth would be revealed. Ariana Mitchell's calm presence seemed to fill the entire lobby, the polished marble reflecting the early morning light in sharp streaks that cut across the brass fixtures, highlighting the subtle shifts of unease in Douglas Whitman's stance, while the clerks and security staff exchanged glances that betrayed their growing realization that this was not an ordinary guest confrontation, and the murmurs among the guests grew louder, a low hum of anticipation and curiosity threading through the space, capturing the weight of the moment, as phones quietly recorded every subtle movement, every deliberate gesture, the young concierge stepping slightly closer to Ariana, eyes wide with recognition, the realization that authority could exist without volume or aggression settling over her like a sudden dawn, while Ariana allowed herself a brief, deliberate pause, grounding herself in the rhythm of the lobby, her mind recalling decades of being underestimated, dismissed, and doubted, and letting that past inform the present without letting anger surface, her calm radiating outward in a palpable energy. Each step she took measured, deliberate, commanding attention without demanding it, and as she signaled to her assistant with a small gesture, the verification protocols quietly initiated in the background, the tension in the room thickening as the staff processed the implications, the hum of whispers weaving through the polished space, the sunlight catching in the chandelier. Above, shimmering across the marble like a reminder that the space was hers to command, the guests now leaning forward, captivated, sensing that they were witnessing the subtle but unmistakable assertion of power, the clerks stiffening as their assumptions faltered, and Ariana's gaze sweeping across the room, calm yet incisive, communicated a quiet but absolute control, a presence that needed no amplification, that was acknowledged in the attentive posture of everyone present, the air charged with expectancy, the collective understanding that the authority she embodied was deliberate and earned, and as the seconds stretched, the lobby seemed to hold its breath, every subtle glance, every measured movement of her hands, reinforcing the awareness that the coming moments would irrevocably shift the perception of those present, that the story unfolding before them was more than an encounter. It was a demonstration of strategic composure and quiet assertion, a moment in which anticipation and recognition collided, leaving the room suspended in the shared realization that Ariana Mitchell was in control, the evidence of her presence and decision-making silently undeniable, and every eye in the lobby fixed upon her, waiting for the moment when the full impact of her quiet, commanding authority would be revealed. Ariana Mitchell held her stance in the lobby, the calm precision in her posture commanding attention as Douglas Whitman attempted to regain composure, his gestures small and uncertain, the clerks behind him exchanging nervous glances, their fingers lingering over the reservation system, unsure of the next move, while the guests leaned slightly forward, their expressions a mixture of intrigue and disbelief, phones quietly raised, capturing every subtle motion and inflection, and Ariana allowed the moment to stretch, her eyes scanning the room with measured authority, absorbing the reactions, noticing the subtle shift in posture among the staff, the tightening of shoulders, the quick glances exchanged as the realization settled that they were witnessing more than a simple confrontation. It was an assertion of long-held authority that had been underestimated. Her assistant's hand moved discreetly to confirm the initiation of the verification protocols, and a faint hum of anticipation rippled through the lobby as the technology silently confirmed the legitimacy of her presence and her authority. The young concierge stepping a little closer, eyes widening, the recognition of the CEO's identity dawning, the polished marble floor reflecting the sunlight in streaks that highlighted the growing awareness in the guests' faces, whispers threading through the crowd, some expressing surprise, others silent acknowledgement. and Ariana's gaze remained steady, unblinking, her calm aura radiating through the space, commanding the room without raising her voice. Every deliberate movement reinforcing her control, the weight of past experiences giving depth to her presence. Recalling the countless times she had been underestimated or dismissed, and channeling that history into a composed energy that filled the lobby. The staff now visibly tense, uncertain, their previous confidence wavering as the undercurrent of authority in Ariana's measured actions became undeniable. The guests, sensing the subtle shift, leaning forward, the atmosphere thickening with the unspoken acknowledgement that the balance of power had quietly yet decisively shifted. Ariana allowed a faint, almost imperceptible smile, signaling that the next step was imminent, her presence alone reshaping the dynamics. Every eye in the lobby fixed upon her, aware that the moment of full revelation was approaching. The demonstration of her control and the unfolding of the verification would soon clarify the disparity between assumption and reality. The polished surfaces, the reflective brass, and the sunlight all converging to frame this turning point. As the room held its collective breath, the anticipation building into a palpable energy, each second stretching with electric tension, leaving every person in the space alert, attentive, and waiting for the quiet yet undeniable assertion of authority to complete its course. Ariana Mitchell noticed the subtle hesitation in Douglas Whitman's movements, the way his fingers lingered over the front desk, the slight shifting of weight in his stance, and she allowed a calm, measured silence to fill the lobby, the polished marble reflecting the morning sunlight in long, bright streaks that highlighted the uncertainty in the staff's eyes, while guests leaned forward, some discreetly recording with their phones, others simply absorbing the tension, their expressions a mixture of awe and curiosity. And the young concierge stepped closer, her gaze locking with Ariana's, recognition and understanding dawning in her eyes, the realization that this woman, so unassuming in appearance, carried authority that had been underestimated, and Ariana tilted her head slightly, acknowledging the shift without speaking. The air in the lobby charged with anticipation, each small movement amplified in the hushed space, while the clerks and security staff exchanged quick glances, uncertainty creeping into their posture as the quiet power in Ariana's presence became undeniable, and she adjusted her stance, allowing her subtle gestures to signal the initiation of verification protocols, the assistants quietly responding, the soft hum of technology confirming her identity and authority, and the guests murmured among themselves. The collective awareness growing that what they had assumed was control had quietly shifted to someone entirely different, and Ariana's eyes swept over the room, calm, precise, commanding, her energy radiating outward, creating a magnetic force that drew attention and focus to her without a single raised voice. The sunlight glinting off the brass fixtures, the reflections on the marble floor emphasizing the movement and stillness. The lobby transformed into a space charged with expectation, the balance of power shifting imperceptibly but undeniably. And as Douglas's expression changed from smirk to tension, the subtle acknowledgement of her authority spreading, whispers growing louder, phones raised higher, the young concierge straightening in recognition of the truth unfolding, and Ariana allowed a brief, almost imperceptible nod, the kind that conveyed certainty and control. Every guest and staff member acutely aware that the dynamics had been altered, that the previous assumptions were no longer valid, and the lobby collectively held its breath, the anticipation building, a quiet energy moving through the polished space, the hum of technology, the reflective surfaces, and the collective gaze of every person in the room converging on Ariana Mitchell, who stood poised, a silent epicenter of authority, ready for the next moment to reveal the full scope of her presence and control, leaving the guests and staff aware that the unfolding events were more than a confrontation, but a demonstration of calculated, quiet power that demanded acknowledgement and respect. Ariana Mitchell felt the subtle shift in energy ripple through the lobby as the verification protocols quietly confirmed her identity, the soft hum of technology intertwining with the low murmur of guests leaning forward, eyes wide and focused, capturing every precise motion and calculated gesture, while Douglas Whitman's posture stiffened, The smirk that had once marked his confidence now replaced by a tight line of uncertainty. The clerks glancing nervously at each other, the polished marble, reflecting the sunlight that streaked through the tall glass windows in sharp, bright lines, illuminating the tension in every corner. The brass fixtures gleaming, catching fleeting reflections of movement, and the young concierge stepped forward, her expression a mixture of surprise and recognition, understanding finally dawning that the authority standing before them could not be questioned, and Ariana allowed a slow, deliberate breath to pass, grounding herself in the rhythm of the room, her calmness magnifying the contrast with the uncertainty surrounding her, each movement deliberate, each glance precise, radiating quiet command without a word. The guests sensing the shift, leaning in closer, some capturing the moment on phones, others watching silently, the air thick with anticipation, charged with the subtle realization that the balance of control had shifted, and the soft shuffle of papers and whispered comments among the staff punctuated the growing awareness that their assumptions had been challenged, the polished floor reflecting the faces of the observers, their expressions ranging from awe to disbelief, and Ariana tilted her head slightly, acknowledging the unspoken recognition from the concierge and a few attentive guests, the collective energy of the room aligning around her presence, the hum of electronic confirmation still running in the background, silently validating her authority. And as she adjusted her stance, every subtle movement amplified in the charged stillness, commanding attention, every eye in the lobby fixed upon her, sensing the calm force that had quietly yet decisively established control, the polished surfaces, the sunlight, the murmurs of realization, all coalescing into a singular moment of awareness, leaving Douglas and the staff frozen, guests captivated, and the entire space suspended in the anticipation of the next move, the unspoken promise that Ariana Mitchell's quiet, measured power was about to fully manifest, reshaping the dynamics of the lobby and leaving every person present aware that the demonstration of authority was complete in its calm precision, an inevitability acknowledged without confrontation. Every detail of the scene magnifying the gravity of her presence and the unmistakable assertion of control that would soon unfold fully before their eyes. Ariana Mitchell's fingers hovered over her phone, the small, precise movements amplified in the tense stillness of the lobby, the polished marble reflecting the morning light in elongated streaks that traced every anxious glance from the guests and staff alike. And she took a deliberate breath, centering herself in the rhythm of the space, her eyes sweeping across the room with calm authority, noting the subtle shifts in posture, the tightening of shoulders, the exchanged glances of uncertainty among the clerks, and the faint hum of electronic verification signaling that her identity and authority were being confirmed quietly but unmistakably. While the young concierge moved a fraction closer, recognition dawning in her expression, the guests leaning forward, some discreetly filming, others watching in silent fascination, all of them sensing the unspoken but undeniable assertion of power. The air thick with anticipation as every micro-movement seemed magnified in the charged atmosphere, and Ariana allowed her presence to resonate fully, her calm radiance contrasting sharply with Douglas Whitman's tightening jaw and uneasy posture, his attempts at regaining composure faltering under the weight of the moment, the clerks hesitating in their actions, unsure how to respond, while the lobby seemed to hold its collective breath, the polished brass and reflective surfaces amplifying the subtle energy. And Ariana shifted her stance slightly, every step deliberate, every gesture measured, signaling to her assistant that the final phase of verification and authority confirmation was underway. The guests sensing the pivot, leaning closer, murmuring softly, the tension building as they collectively realized that control had subtly, yet irrevocably, transferred to the woman who had entered with quiet confidence. The young concierge standing straighter, acknowledging the truth in Ariana's calm demeanor, the clerks exchanging hurried, uncertain glances as the protocols quietly ran in the background, and the energy in the lobby shifted, the hum of anticipation and recognition threading through every corner, the sunlight glinting off the fixtures, highlighting the expressions of awe and curiosity in the crowd, while Ariana's gaze remained steady, piercing, commanding attention without a word. every observer fully aware that the balance of power had changed, and that the subtle, deliberate authority she exuded would soon culminate in a visible demonstration of control, leaving the guests and staff suspended in shared awareness of the impending revelation, the tension palpable, the anticipation electric. The polished lobby acting as both stage and witness to the quiet but undeniable assertion of power that Ariana Mitchell embodied, every detail conspiring to mark this moment as the turning point, the cusp before the full scope of her influence and command would unfold in the eyes of all present, making each second stretch with suspense and setting the stage for the decisive shift that was about to occur. Ariana Mitchell finally spoke, her voice calm, measured, and cutting through the tension like sunlight piercing fog. "You have been mistaken about who stands here," she said, each word deliberate, resonating through the lobby, the polished marble reflecting the light and every startled expression, while Douglas Whitman's eyes widened, the confidence he had clung to moments ago faltering as he glanced at the clerks and security, their earlier certainty now replaced by unease, and the guests leaned forward, some instinctively raising their phones, others simply absorbing the quiet authority that radiated from Ariana, each gesture precise, every motion deliberate, signaling control without raising volume. And as she lifted her card and slid it onto the counter, the system pinged softly, confirming her identity, the electronic hum a subtle but undeniable reinforcement of her command. The young concierge's eyes flickered with recognition, a nod almost imperceptible, acknowledging the truth that had quietly been established, while the staff exchanged glances, their murmurs growing in volume as the reality sank in, the previously tense air shifting, charged with anticipation and recognition, and Ariana allowed herself a measured breath, the calm in her stance contrasting with the faltering composure of Douglas, whose gestures became smaller, uncertain, while every guest now watched closely, understanding without words that the dynamic in the room had irrevocably changed, the polished surfaces, brass fixtures, and sunlight amplifying the significance of the moment, the lobby acting as a silent witness to the quiet assertion of authority, and as she spoke again, her words precise and intentional, explaining the verification and acknowledging the record of her ownership, the murmurs from the guests gaining strength, whispers of awe, curiosity, and disbelief threading through the space. The young concierge stepping slightly forward, her posture straightening, her expression a mixture of respect and realization, and the clerks at the front desk hesitated, glancing at each other, the tension of uncertainty settling in as the evidence of Ariana's identity became undeniable, the lobby charged with quiet energy, every breath, glance, and subtle movement magnified by the collective awareness of those present, the moment, stretching, a slow unfolding of recognition, anticipation, and acceptance. And as Ariana's gaze swept over the room, calm yet piercing, the visitors and staff alike felt the weight of her presence, understanding that control had been quietly reclaimed, that authority had been asserted without spectacle, and that the next moments would confirm in full the correctness of perception, the inevitability of her position, and the undeniable power she wielded, leaving everyone in the polished lobby suspended in shared acknowledgement, eyes locked on Ariana Mitchell, awaiting the full revelation that would quietly, irreversibly shift the balance of the space in her favor, making clear that respect and recognition could be commanded with measured poise, deliberate timing, and undeniable presence. Ariana Mitchell observed the subtle change in the room, the way the guests' postures straightened, leaning in slightly, their eyes wide with recognition and anticipation, while Douglas Whitman's attempts to assert authority faltered, his gestures smaller, his smirk replaced by a tightening of the jaw and a flicker of doubt in his eyes. The clerks behind the front desk exchanging uneasy glances as the verification system quietly confirmed Ariana's identity and ownership of the property, the soft hum of technology threading through the lobby, unnoticed by most but felt in the charged atmosphere. And the young concierge stepped slightly forward, a subtle nod of acknowledgement passing between them, recognition and respect in her expression, while the guests whispered among themselves, some raising phones discreetly, others simply observing, the air thick with a palpable energy that seemed to amplify the slightest movement. the polished marble floors reflecting the sunlight in sharp streaks across the room, highlighting the expressions of surprise and awe. And Ariana allowed herself a measured breath, the calm in her posture radiating outward, each subtle movement deliberate, each glance precise, every inch of her presence conveying authority without a single elevated tone. And as she spoke again, her voice smooth, steady, and precise, she outlined the implications of the verification, the legitimacy of her presence, and the oversight of the staff's earlier assumptions, while the murmurs from the guests grew, building into a low wave of collective awareness, the young concierge straightening in recognition of the truth, the clerks now visibly tense, uncertain how to respond as the lobby collectively absorbed the shift, the polished surfaces and brass accents catching fleeting glints of movement and anticipation, the energy in the room now fully aligned with Ariana's calm, quiet authority, each observer aware that control had been re-established, the balance irrevocably altered, and the subtle tension magnified in the hush that settled over the lobby. The guests holding their collective breath, the sunlight emphasizing every line and shadow, every face reflecting surprise, understanding, and acknowledgement, and Ariana's gaze swept across the room, unflinching, steady, commanding attention without demand, the awareness of her presence filling every corner, each person sensing that the unfolding events were a demonstration of deliberate, measured authority, a display of control that had quietly reclaimed the space, reshaping the dynamics and expectations of all present, leaving Douglas Whitman, the clerks, and the guests suspended in the shared realization that the power had shifted and that the next moments would confirm the full scope of Ariana Mitchell's influence. Her quiet, unwavering presence dominating the polished lobby as all waited to witness the decisive assertion of authority. Ariana Mitchell's presence in the lobby had shifted the atmosphere completely, the polished marble and brass accents reflecting not just sunlight, but the undeniable tension as Douglas Whitman's composure faltered, the clerks exchanging anxious glances, fingers hovering uncertainly over reservation systems, and the guests leaning in, some subtly raising their phones to record, others simply absorbing the gravity of the moment, and Ariana allowed a controlled, deliberate pause, her calm demeanor, radiating authority, her eyes sweeping the room, noting the subtle acknowledgement on the young concierge's face, the flicker of surprise and respect in her posture. The murmurs among the guests building, a low hum of realization threading through the polished space, every movement amplified in the charged atmosphere, while the verification system quietly completed its confirmation, the soft hum of technology underscoring the truth of her ownership and authority, and Ariana began to speak again, measured, clear, each word deliberate, explaining the implications of the verification, the accuracy of her reservation, and the oversight of the staff's prior assumptions, the murmurs rising, a wave of recognition spreading through the guests, their expressions a mixture of awe, disbelief, and admiration, the polished floors catching the light and reflecting every motion, Douglas Whitman's gestures becoming smaller, uncertain, the smirk replaced with a tightening of the jaw, the clerks now frozen with awareness of the shift in authority, the lobby acting as a silent witness to the quiet but absolute reclamation of control, and Ariana allowed her presence to fill every corner, her calm energy undeniable, commanding attention without raising her voice, the subtle nod of the young concierge signaling recognition of her authority, while guests whispered softly, leaning in, fully aware that the balance of power had been irreversibly altered, the polished surfaces reflecting their captivated expressions, the sunlight highlighting every glance and gesture, the subtle tension vibrating through the air as each second stretched with anticipation. And Ariana's steady gaze swept the room, piercing, precise, carrying a quiet assertion that left no doubt. Her calm command contrasted sharply with the faltering demeanor of Douglas and his staff, the murmurs among the guests now turning into a collective acknowledgement, an awareness that they were witnessing not only the correction of a misunderstanding, but the definitive demonstration of authority and ownership. And every observer sensed the inevitability of the next actions, the quiet yet absolute manifestation of power ready to unfold, leaving the lobby charged with anticipation, every detail of the space, from reflective surfaces to attentive eyes, emphasizing the magnitude of Ariana Mitchell's calm, deliberate control, and the irreversible shift in the perception and dynamics of everyone present. Ariana Mitchell took a deliberate step forward, the polished lobby seeming to contract around her presence, every guest, clerk, and staff member acutely aware of the quiet authority she radiated, the sunlight catching the brass accents and reflecting across the marble floors in long, sharp lines that emphasized each subtle motion, and she held her phone with calm precision, signaling her assistant to finalize the confirmation. The soft hum of the verification system threading through the air almost imperceptibly, yet carrying an undeniable weight of legitimacy. While Douglas Whitman's gestures became smaller, more hesitant, the smirk long gone, replaced by a thin line of tension as the realization settled fully that the control he had assumed was never his. And the young concierge's expression shifted completely, a combination of recognition, respect, and awe, passing silently between her and Ariana, while the guests whispered among themselves, some filming, some simply watching, the low murmur of acknowledgement spreading, the polished surfaces reflecting the intensity of attention, the light, and the subtle movement in the space. And Ariana's eyes swept methodically across the room, noting the change in posture, the slight steps back of the staff, the tightening of shoulders, the shifting weight, the subtle acknowledgement of authority that had, quietly but decisively, returned to her, every motion measured, deliberate, signaling control without the need for volume. And as the verification completed, the assistant's voice confirming remotely, Ariana allowed a faint, controlled smile, a signal that the moment of quiet assertion was complete, leaving the staff and guests suspended in collective realization. The lobby itself feeling transformed by the energy of recognition and respect, the polished floors and brass accents framing the expressions of surprise, admiration, and understanding that spread through the observers. Douglas Whitman's posture shrinking slightly, uncertainty etched into his expression, the clerks frozen as acknowledgement of their misjudgment settled in, the guests fully aware of the subtle but absolute shift in dynamics, the soft hum of technology and the ambient sounds of the lobby blending with the quiet, commanding presence of Ariana, each observer sensing that the control of the space had been reclaimed, authority silently yet undeniably asserted, the polished surfaces, the reflections, the light, the shifting glances all emphasizing the completeness of the moment. And as Ariana Mitchell allowed her gaze to rest evenly across the room, steady and unwavering, the air seemed to pulse with the quiet triumph of precision and control, every detail of the scene, from the expressions of the staff to the posture of the guests, to the reflective marble floors, to the glinting sunlight, reinforcing the understanding that her authority was absolute, deliberate, and fully recognized, leaving the lobby transformed, the observers silently acknowledging that the balance of power had shifted and that the full measure of her presence had been revealed, a culmination of quiet, unassailable influence that no one could deny.